talk a lot about discharge in Tai Chi Chuan. You've got to understand, discharge is not a weapon. It's not something, it's very tempting to think of it as a weapon. It's like, oh, I don't even have to hurt anybody. You know, anybody attacks me, I can just go, boom, and they'll just fly away and be so impressed they'll run off. Well, it doesn't work like that, I'm sorry. And that's not what Tai Chi is meant to produce. It's not meant to produce discharge as a weapon. Discharge is a phenomenon that occurs between two extremely skillful players. You can't discharge your old grandma, you can't discharge a drunk on the street. There's a whole bunch of people that you cannot discharge. As Mr. Jew used to say, discharge means make him jump. Okay? This was very enlightening to me when he said this, so I'll repeat it again. Discharge means make him jump. You are not, you know, in other words, and also as Jiang Qing said, even the greatest master cannot discharge a statue. In other words, you need the other person's aliveness and the other person's skill to discharge him. Doesn't mean you can't kill him. I mean, it's fine. But the whole purpose of Tai Chi is produce a method of practice that you can train and get fantastically good without killing each other. So when you get to the point where you can discharge each other, this means you have reached the point where you can release jing, and the other person, well, let me explain. Jing is a very high frequency force called internal force, sometimes called the 1-inch punch. That's because, like John Fu said, if it doesn't operate within a space of 1 inch, it's not jing. Okay? But you should realize that jing is a wave. And as a wave, it's just like other waves. The difference is it's smaller. That's all. When a wave becomes smaller, it becomes faster and it becomes more powerful. Because speed is the secret of power in terms of boxing. Because, as you probably all know, power is related to the square of the speed. So when you speed things up, they get very, very, very powerful. So most people laugh at Tai Chi Chuan and say, like, oh, you know, this is so funny because you practice really slowly and everybody knows that that's the opposite of the skill. Yeah, we practice slowly and there's a reason for that, but I'm not going to talk about that a lot today. But the point is, when you practice slowly, you can still practice waves. You can still practice producing waves. And those waves are the whole go through the whole body. So eventually, you simply refine it to the point where they're higher frequency waves of a much smaller wavelength. At any rate, when you can release this jing, you can hurt someone because there's only two kinds of people that can't be hurt by this high frequency strike. And that is people who are completely soft or people who are completely hard. And it's true that you can sort of be completely hard and kind of resist it. This is what I call the statue defense. And one of the problems of Tai Chi is that because of practicing Tui Shou and these artificial rules about Tui Shou, about making it into a contest, you've got people practicing methods that sort of seem to work in terms of pushing, but they wouldn't work at all in terms of fighting. They actually are refinements of two things that children do when you try to move them. The two things children do. One is to become completely stiff like this. They can't move them. And the other is completely, just let their weight sink into the ground so you can't pick them up. Most people, and I'm talking about a lot of teachers too, they think this is root. In other words, their ability to prevent you from making this exchange of energy, they interpret as their skill. They say, you can't discharge me. Well, as Jiang Qing said, you can't discharge a statue. So if you become a statue, you can't be discharged. You can be killed. You can be easily, injured and, dominated or whatever you want to call it. But you can't be discharged. Discharge requires you to transfer the force through you to the floor and come back. Because if the force, well, I said that you have to be completely hard or completely soft. If jing, and this wave, is interrupted anywhere passing through the body, wherever the interruption occurs is where the injury occurs. So in other words, if you have some sort of tension in your body somewhere and somebody gives you a correct internal strike, it's when it tries to go through, it reaches that tension, that's where you'll be injured, not on the surface. So that's why the whole sort of history of this kind of fighting is like, external stuff produces like bruises and, all kinds of stuff on the outside. But internal stuff doesn't seem to hurt at all on the outside, but then it kills you with it produces this very deep strike on the inside. So you're trying to transfer this through. Now, the first step of discharging somebody else is being discharged yourself. because it means you have learned to take this force, take it all the way through, and bring it back. But how fast did you do that? If it took you a certain length of time to do that, in that length of time, your position is changed. And it's changed so that when the force comes back, it goes back into you completely. And you get discharged. That's what causes the discharge. So if you're not skillful enough to do that, there's no discharge. It's just people shoving each other, which is not training at all. Because, and this is why Tai Chi has a terrible reputation in terms of fighting. You know, people, somebody told me once, sure, it's the greatest martial art, but who can do it? I mean, that's really true. Because it does take a long, long, long time to develop jing. And everything you're doing is useless for any other kind of weapon. The stuff that the forms we practice are derived from Shaolin, but we're not using them the same way. Shaolin uses a lot of long force. You know, theoretically, it's supposed to have like all this internal force, but actually, you know, when you make a strike, that's long. When you move force through a big distance, that's called long force. When you can touch someone and this kind of shaking move that creates this huge force over this very small space, that's jing. Now, as I say, it's a matter of skill on both parts. Can you produce the jing? Can the person transmit the jing to the floor? And then the ultimate skill is, can I transmit to the floor and transmit it back so that it goes back into you? But there's another thing that has to happen. You still have to be in balance.